It was the only choice she had, the only choice he had left her. Rain fell in slick, merciless sheets against the penthouse window, mirroring the silent tears tracking down Han Yu-jin's face. The city lights of Seoul, usually a glittering promise, were a blurry, mocking constellation from this height, from this cage. "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Kwon Ji-hoon stood across the vast, minimalist living room, a statue carved from shadows and bespoke tailoring. His face, usually a mask of calm authority, was fractured with an emotion she had never seen there before, a raw, desperate pain that mirrored her own. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched her break. "You built a cage of gold and called it a palace," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "But the bars are still bars, Ji-hoon. And the blood that paid for it is still red." He took a step forward, his hand twitching at his side as if to reach for her, but he stopped himself. The discipline that ran through him like steel held him in place. "Yu-jin, don't!" The single word was a plea, a command, a confession of his own agony. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. She turned, her hand closing around the cold metal of the doorknob. Each movement felt like tearing her own skin. Leaving him was like leaving oxygen. It was necessary for survival, but she knew she would spend the rest of her life gasping for air. This was the end, the brutal, inevitable conclusion to a story that had begun with a terrified text message sent to a wrong number, a story that had felt like a fairy tale, right up until the moment she realized the prince was a king of a dark and terrible kingdom. She pulled the door open without looking back. She couldn't. If she saw his face again, she would shatter. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a gunshot in the cavernous silence. 3 months earlier. The bell above the door of the Morning Brew Cafe tinkled, a cheerful sound that did nothing to lift the weariness from Yu-jin's bones. It was her 8th hour on her feet, the scent of espresso and burnt sugar clinging to her clothes and hair. She managed a smile for the customer, a man in a rumpled suit who had been nursing the same cold Americano for 2 hours using the free Wi-Fi. Her life was a series of these moments, small, repetitive, and financially draining, a part-time barista, a part-time convenience store clerk, and a freelance illustrator who spent more time getting rejected by clients than actually drawing. Seoul was an expensive city to have dreams in. Her best friend, So-hee, claimed her problem was that she was too soft. Yu-jin thought her problem was that her bank account was too empty. "Another refill, Mr. Choi?" she asked, her smile feeling brittle. Mr. Choi looked up from his laptop, his gaze lingering a little too long, a little too low. It was the kind of look that made her skin crawl. "Just enjoying the atmosphere, Miss Han. You make this place feel very welcoming." She just nodded, grabbing a cloth to wipe a counter that was already spotless. She could feel his eyes on her back. It was a familiar, unpleasant sensation for any woman working a service job. You learned to ignore it. You built a wall inside your head and pretended it wasn't happening. When her shift finally ended, she practically ran out of the cafe, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the evening chill. The streets were crowded, a river of tired faces heading home. She put in her earbuds, letting the music drown out the city's noise, and began the 20-minute walk to her tiny apartment. She was halfway there when the feeling started. A prickle on the back of her neck. A sense of being watched that was different from the casual glances of strangers. It was focused, intentional. She glanced over her shoulder. A sea of people. Nothing. No one stood out. She told herself she was being paranoid. It was the long day. It was Mr. Choi's creepy stare getting to her. But when she turned down her quieter side street, she heard it. Footsteps. A little too loud. A little too in sync with her own. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. "Don't run! Don't show fear!" She sped up, her worn sneakers slapping against the pavement. The footsteps behind her matched her pace. Her breath hitched. Her building was still a block away, The streetlights seemed dimmer, the shadows between them deeper and more menacing. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, her fingers slick with sweat. She had to text Sohee. Sohee lived just one floor up. She could meet her at the door. Her fingers trembled as she tapped out the message, her eyes darting between the screen and the dark street ahead. I think he followed me home. She hit send, not even checking the contact name, and shoved the phone back into her pocket, her hand closing around the keys nestled at the bottom. A flimsy, pathetic weapon. She finally reached her building's entrance, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. The footsteps were closer now, so close she could almost feel the breath of whoever was behind her. The lock clicked open. She threw herself inside, slamming the heavy door shut and leaning against it, her lungs burning. She waited, listened. Silence. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a vibration that felt like an electric shock. Thank God. She pulled it out, her thumb swiping to unlock the screen. But the reply wasn't from Sohee. It was from an unknown number, and it had arrived just 40 seconds after she'd sent her panicked plea. Where are you? Are you safe? Kwon Ji-hoon stared at the glowing screen of his phone, the words a bizarre and jarring intrusion into the sterile silence of the boardroom. I think he followed me home. Around the polished mahogany table, his executives sat ramrod straight, their faces impassive. They were discussing a hostile takeover of a shipping logistics company, a move that would consolidate the Golden Phoenix Syndicate's control over the Incheon ports. It was a conversation about millions of dollars, about power, about the subtle and not-so-subtle application of force. It was a conversation he had a dozen times a month, and it bored him to his very soul. This life was an inheritance, a crown of thorns placed on his head by his father, Chairman Kwon. He wore it well. He was decisive, ruthless when he needed to be, and possessed an intellect that saw 10 moves ahead in any negotiation. He was the perfect heir. He was also profoundly, achingly lonely. His world was one of calculated risks, strategic alliances, and veiled threats. It was a world utterly devoid of spontaneity. Until now. The text message was a raw splinter of genuine human fear. It was real. More real than the profit margins projected on the screen before him, more real than the deferential fear in the eyes of his subordinates. Who was she? And why did her terror feel like a stone dropped into the placid, dark well of his own existence? Min-jun, his second in command and the closest thing he had to a friend, leaned in slightly. Sir, your decision on the final offer? Ji-hoon held up a single, dismissive finger, his eyes still locked on the message. His thumbs moved with a speed and decisiveness that his executives usually saw when he was signing away a rival's future. Where are you? Are you safe? He sent it. The words felt inadequate. He wanted to do more. He wanted to find this person, this stranger, and eliminate the source of her fear with the brutal efficiency he applied to his business dealings. It was a strange, primal, and overwhelmingly protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the marble floor. The room fell into an even deeper silence. Every eye was on him. The meeting is over, he said, his voice a low baritone that carried effortless authority. Proceed as planned. Min-jun with me. He strode out of the room without a backward glance, his phone clutched in his hand. Min-jun followed, his expression unquestioning but curious. Sir? Trace a number, Ji-hoon commanded, reading it aloud from his screen. I want a name, an address, and a live satellite feed of the location. Now. A threat? Min-jun asked, already pulling out his own device. Ji-hoon paused, his reflection a stark, lonely figure in the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city. No, he said, more to himself than to his lieutenant. A damsel in distress, I think. His phone buzzed again. Her reply. Who is this? This isn't Sohee. A flicker of something, amusement, frustration, passed over his features. She was afraid, but she was still sharp. He found himself inexplicably pleased by that. A wrong number. But the question stands. Are you safe? He watched the 3 dots appear and disappear. She was thinking. He could almost picture her, huddled behind a locked door, heart racing, trying to decide if the stranger who received her message was a threat or a savior. He found he very much wanted to be the latter. I'm inside my apartment. I'm fine. Sorry to bother you. A dismissal. An attempt to close the door on him just as she had closed it on her pursuer. He would not allow it. Stay there. Don't open the door for anyone. A car is on its way to you. Min-jun looked up from his tablet, his eyebrows raised. Sir, I have her location, an apartment in the Mapo district. But a car? Send one, Ji-hoon said simply. Black sedan, my personal detail. Tell them to wait outside her building. They are not to approach, they are to ensure no one else does. And the identity? Han Yu-jin, age 26, works 2 jobs, an orphan. Behind on her rent, Min-jun recited his efficiency as sharp as ever. Ji-hoon absorbed the information. It painted a picture of a life so different from his own, a life of struggle and resilience. It deepened the strange fascination that had taken root in his chest. Her next text came through, laced with the kind of defiant suspicion he secretly admired. A car? Who the hell are you? This is creepy. Don't send a car. Ji-hoon allowed himself a small, rare smile. It's not a request. It's for your peace of mind. And mine. He knew she wouldn't get in the car. He didn't want her to. He just wanted her to know that, for tonight at least, someone was watching over her. A guardian angel in the form of a black sedan with tinted windows and armed men inside. The irony was not lost on him. He, who profited from the shadows, was now using them to offer a stranger a sliver of light. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the distant lights of the Mapo district, feeling a connection to a single flickering light in that vast darkness. He didn't know her face, her voice, or the color of her eyes, but he knew her fear, and in that moment, he decided he would never let her feel it again. Yu-jin stared at her phone, a cocktail of fear and utter bewilderment churning in her stomach. It's for your peace of mind. And mine. What kind of person says that? A psycho? A rich eccentric? Some kind of covert agent who had accidentally been given a civilian number? Her mind raced through a dozen impossible scenarios. She peeked through her blinds. The street below was empty, save for the usual late-night delivery scooters. The follower was gone. The immediate terror had subsided, replaced by a deep, unsettling weirdness. And then, a sleek black sedan, the kind you only see in movies escorting politicians or criminals, pulled up silently to the curb across the street. It just sat there, engine idling, its tinted windows revealing nothing. A dark, quiet predator. Her blood ran cold. He had actually done it. She typed furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. There is a car outside. Is that you? This isn't funny. Is this some kind of sick prank? The reply was instantaneous. It's my security. They will not bother you. They are just ensuring the street remains empty. Go to sleep, Han Yu-jin. You are safe. He knew her name. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the cheap laminate floor. He knew her name. The air left her lungs in a whoosh. This had moved from creepy to terrifying. How could he know her name? She scrambled to pick up the phone, her mind a whirlwind of panic. She should call the police. But what would she say? That a man she accidentally texted sent a car to park outside her building? They would think she was crazy. She texted So-hee, this time making sure it was the right number. So-hee, are you awake? Something really weird just happened. So-hee's reply came a minute later. What's up? Heard a door slam. Everything okay? Yu-jin explained the entire bizarre sequence of events in a flurry of messages. The follower, the wrong number, the cryptic replies, the car, the fact that the stranger knew her name. So-hee's response was a string of wide-eyed emojis followed by a text. Yu-jin! That is stalker-level crazy. Block the number. Call the cops. I'm coming down. But Yujin hesitated. It was terrifying, yes. But there was something in his tone. It wasn't threatening. It was authoritative, calming, even, as if he had simply identified a problem, her fear, and deployed a solution. It was the logic of a man who moved mountains without a second thought. Despite her fear, a tiny, traitorous part of her felt protected. Wait, she texted Sohee back. Let's just see what happens. The car is just sitting there. For the next hour, she and Sohee sat by her window, peeking through the blinds like spies in their own home. The black sedan never moved. No one got out. It was a silent, imposing guardian. Slowly, impossibly, her fear began to recede, replaced by a profound curiosity. Who was he? The next morning, the car was gone. It was as if it had been a dream, but the text thread on her phone was real. She reread it a dozen times on her way to the cafe. She had blocked the number as Sohee insisted, but she hadn't deleted the conversation. It was a strange, unsettling souvenir from the weirdest night of her life. The day passed in a blur of normalcy that felt jarring after the night's events. Mr. Choi was there again, but he barely looked at her. He seemed nervous, almost afraid. When he left, he practically scurried out the door. It was odd, but she was too preoccupied to give it much thought. A few days later, her landlord, a notoriously grumpy old man who hounded her weekly for the rent, suddenly became cheerful and lenient. "Pay when you can, Miss Han. Don't you worry about it," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand. It was so out of character, she was left speechless. Then, an anonymous package arrived at her door. Inside was a gift certificate to the most expensive art supply store in Seoul. The amount was staggering, enough to buy materials for a year. There was no note, no sender. Sohee was convinced it was all connected. "It's him! The creepy wrong number stalker! This is how they get you, Yujin. They shower you with gifts, make you feel special, and then they own you." "Or maybe I won a contest I forgot I entered," Yujin countered weakly, though she didn't believe it herself. The invisible hand of the stranger was all around her, smoothing the rough edges of her difficult life. It was unsettling. It was invasive. And a small, guilty part of her was deeply, profoundly grateful. She found herself thinking about him constantly. This faceless, nameless man who spoke in commands and solved problems she didn't even know how to articulate. Her finger hovered over the unblock button more times than she could count. She held out for a week. It was a particularly bad day. A commission she'd been counting on fell through, and her boss at the convenience store had cut her hours. She was sitting in her apartment, staring at a pile of bills, the weight of her life pressing down on her. On impulse, she unblocked the number. She didn't know what she was going to write. Maybe just to ask why, to tell him to stop. Before she could type a single word, a message came through, as if he'd been waiting. "I was hoping you'd unblock me." Her heart leaped into her throat. It was him. "How did you know?" she typed back, her hands trembling slightly. "I know you've been having a difficult week. I wanted to make sure you were all right." The invasion of her privacy was breathtaking, and yet his concern felt genuine. The landlord, the art supplies. "That was you?" "Yes. Why?" "Because I can." The simplicity of it, the raw statement of power, should have scared her. It did, but it also intrigued her. "And Mr. Choi, the man from the cafe? He suddenly seems terrified of me." There was a pause before his reply. He was given a compelling reason to adjust his attitude. He won't be a problem again. A chill went down her spine. A compelling reason. She could only imagine what that meant. This man wasn't just rich. He was dangerous. "You can't just interfere in my life like this," she texted, her indignation warring with a strange sense of security. "I disagree," he replied. "I want to meet you, Yujin. Absolutely not. For all I know, you're a 60-year-old man living in his mother's basement." A picture message came through. It was a selfie, not a posed, preening photo, but a quick, candid shot. He was in what looked like a car, wearing a simple black t-shirt, and he was devastating. Sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the screen, a strong jawline, and lips set in a serious line. A faint, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made him look more real, more dangerous. He was young, maybe early 30s, and handsome in a way that was almost intimidating. He was the furthest thing from a basement dweller she could possibly imagine. She felt a blush creep up her neck. He was a face now, a very, very handsome face. Fine, his next text read, "You've seen me. Now let me see you. I'll be at your cafe tomorrow at 3. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And the terrifying part? The part that made her question her own sanity? She wanted him to be there. Jihoon felt a tremor of something unfamiliar as he stepped out of his car. Nerves. It was a foreign sensation, and he disliked it. He was a man who could face down triad leaders and backroom politicians without his heart rate climbing a single beat. Yet, the prospect of meeting a barista in a small neighborhood cafe had his hands feeling slick. He had Min-jun run a full background check, of course. He knew everything there was to know about Han Yu-jin on paper. Her school records, her work history, her non-existent credit score. He knew she liked old movies and spicy tteokbokki, and that she sketched strangers on the subway in a worn notebook. These details, which should have satisfied his curiosity, only deepened his obsession. They were pieces of a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. But data was not the same as the real thing. He pushed open the door, the same cheerful bell announcing his arrival. The cafe was small, cozy, filled with the scent of coffee and the low hum of conversation. And then he saw her. She was behind the counter, her hair tied back in a messy bun, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way of the women who moved through his world. Women sculpted by surgeons and stylists. Her beauty was something else entirely. It was in the fierce concentration in her eyes as she worked the espresso machine, in the determined set of her jaw, in the easy way she smiled at an elderly customer. She was authentic, real. Their eyes met across the room. It was like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The rest of the world dissolved into a muted blur. He saw recognition flash in her eyes, followed by a wave of apprehension. She knew who he was. He walked to the counter, the short distance feeling like a mile. He felt clumsy, exposed, stripped of his usual armor of power and control. Here, he was not Chairman Kwan's heir or the head of the syndicate. He was just a man who had stalked her from a distance and was now facing her for the first time. "Hello, Yu-jin," he said. His voice sounded rougher than he intended. She swallowed, her knuckles white where she gripped the counter. "You're him." It was a statement, not a question. "I am," he confirmed. "My name is Jihoon." He didn't offer his family name. Kwan was a name that carried too much weight, a name that opened doors and buried secrets. He wanted her to know him, not his legacy. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. It was her armor, sarcasm and suspicion. "An Americano," he said, his lips twitching into a half-smile. "And 5 minutes of your time." She looked as if she wanted to refuse, to tell him to get out. But something in his gaze held her. She gave a short, jerky nod and turned to make his coffee, her movements stiff and self-conscious. He watched her, fascinated by the small, graceful efficiency of her hands. He had seen hands sign billion-dollar contracts, pull triggers, and shuffle dirty money. Her hands created. They served. They were honest. She placed the coffee on the counter, refusing to meet his eyes. "That'll be 4,001. He placed a 50,001 note on the counter. "Keep the change." "I can't accept that." "Then consider it a retainer," he said smoothly. "For your time." Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with indignation. "My time isn't for sale." "Good," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I wouldn't be interested if it were. I'm asking for it as a gift. Please, sit with me." He gestured to a small, empty table in the corner. She hesitated for a long moment, her internal battle playing out on her expressive face. Curiosity, he was betting, would win out over fear. It did. With a sigh of resignation, she untied her apron and walked around the counter, sitting opposite him. She sat on the edge of her chair, poised to flee. "This is insane," she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Is this legal? Finding my name, sending people to my home?" "It exists in a gray area," he admitted, taking a sip of the coffee. It was the best he'd ever had. "But my intentions were to ensure your safety. Your intentions were to terrify me. An unfortunate but necessary side effect," he said, unapologetic. "Tell me about your art, Eugene." The question threw her. She had expected more questions about the text, more justifications for his behavior. "What?" "Your art," he repeated patiently. "Minjun, my assistant, tells me you are very talented, but you lack resources." The mention of his assistant knowing details of her life sent another wave of unease through her. "You have an assistant who investigates baristas you accidentally text?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I have an assistant who investigates anything that captures my interest," he corrected gently. "And you, Miss Han, have captured my interest more than anything has in a very long time." His directness was like a punch to the chest. There was no artifice, no game. Just a raw, intense declaration. She didn't know how to respond. The men she knew fumbled and hinted. This man stated his intentions as if they were immutable facts of nature. She found herself talking, telling him about her sketches, about the dream of having her own studio, of painting canvases instead of latte foam. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just absorbed her words, making her feel as if her small, struggling dreams were the most important thing in the world. When her break was over, she felt dizzy, as if she'd just stepped off a roller coaster. "I have to get back to work," she said, standing up. "Dinner," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tonight, I'll pick you up at 8. I haven't agreed to that." "You will," he said with a quiet confidence that was both infuriating and thrilling. He stood, his height and presence seeming to shrink the small cafe. "Wear something you like. It doesn't matter what it is." And then he was gone, leaving her with a half-full coffee cup, a generous tip she hadn't accepted, and a heart that was beating far too fast. So he cornered her the moment he left. "Was that him? He looks like he walked out of a drama, and he has a scar. That's prime male lead material. What did he say? Is he a Cheeball heir, a secret agent, a vampire?" "He's intense," Eugene managed, her mind still reeling. "And he's picking me up for dinner at 8, so he squealed. "This is it, your Cinderella moment." Eugene wasn't so sure. Cinderella's prince probably didn't have his enemies persuaded to adjust their attitudes. She had a feeling this fairy tale had a much darker, more complicated ending. But as she went home to get ready, she couldn't deny the flutter of dangerous excitement in her stomach. Their first date was a lesson in unreality. Ji-hoon's car, the same black sedan that had guarded her street, was driven by a chauffeur who didn't speak. The interior was silent, smelling of leather and quiet power. He didn't take her to a restaurant. Instead, they arrived at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, which was, inexplicably, closed. "A bit late for a museum trip, isn't it?" she asked, looking at the dark, imposing building. Ji-hoon simply led her to a side entrance, where a nervous-looking curator was waiting. He unlocked the doors, bowed deeply to Ji-hoon, and then disappeared into the shadows, leaving them completely alone in the vast, silent halls. "Did you rent out the entire museum?" Eugene whispered, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I made a donation," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "I thought you might appreciate seeing the art without the crowds." They walked through the galleries in silence for a while, surrounded by masterpieces of Korean art. He didn't pretend to be an expert. Instead, he watched her. He watched the way her eyes lit up in front of a particular abstract painting, the way she traced the lines of a sculpture with her finger in the air. "That one," he said, pointing to a swirling, chaotic canvas of blues and blacks. "Why do you like it?" Because it feels honest, she said without thinking. It's not trying to be pretty, it's just showing the chaos. It's beautiful because it's a mess. He stopped and looked at her, his expression unreadable. A beautiful mess, he repeated softly. I understand that. In that moment, she felt a crack in his perfect, controlled facade. She saw a flicker of the same chaos he saw in the painting, a shared understanding that went beyond words. Later, they ate dinner not in a crowded restaurant, but on a private terrace atop his office building, a table for two set against the backdrop of the entire city skyline. The food was exquisite, served by silent waiters who appeared and vanished like ghosts. You need to stop doing this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the opulence around them. Doing what? This, the grand gestures, the renting of museums. It's too much. It doesn't feel real. It is real, he countered, his gaze intense. This is my world, Eugen. I'm not pretending to be someone else. I want to share it with you. But I don't belong in this world, she argued. My world is instant noodles and overdue bills. Your world is talent and resilience and a heart that you guard like a fortress, he said, his voice low and serious. That is far more valuable than anything you see here. This, he gestured to the glittering city, is just scenery. You are the art. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her and seen past the tired barista, the struggling artist. He saw her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ji-hoon seamlessly inserted himself into her life. He never overwhelmed her with his wealth, but used it in subtle ways. He had a top-tier gallery owner discover her sketches at the cafe. He arranged for her to have a small studio space in a building his company owned, telling her the rent was subsidized by an arts grant. He never lied, but he omitted the full truth. He was building a world for her where her dreams could flourish. A gilded cage she didn't even realize was closing around her. She was falling for him. Hard. She loved his quiet intensity, the way he listened, the surprising gentleness he showed only to her. She let herself ignore the red flags, the cryptic phone calls he took in hushed tones, the way hardened men in suits bowed to him on the street, the ever-present shadow of Min-jun. Lunch at a quiet, exclusive restaurant when an older man with eyes as cold and hard as granite approached their table. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Ji-hoon, the man said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He looked at Eugen with open disdain, his eyes cataloging her simple dress and lack of expensive jewelry in a single, dismissive sweep. You have been distracted lately. Now I see why. Ji-hoon stood up, his body instantly rigid, his posture transforming from a relaxed man on a date to a soldier facing his commanding officer. Father, this is not the time or the place. Any place where the heir to the Golden Phoenix is consorting with this, he waved a hand in her direction, is my place. End it. She is a liability. Golden Phoenix. The name meant nothing to Eugen, but the venom in the old man's voice was unmistakable. She is with me, Ji-hoon said, his voice dangerously low, a quiet rumble of thunder that promised a storm. You will show her respect. Chairman Kwan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Respect is earned, boy, not given to street urchins. Do not forget who you are, and what you owe this family. He gave Eugen one last withering look and then swept away, his entourage in his wake. The silence he left behind was heavy and suffocating. Who was that? Eugen asked, her voice trembling slightly. My father, Ji-hoon said, his jaw tight. And the Golden Phoenix? What is that? He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw him truly close himself off. The mask of calm authority slammed back into place. It's the name of our parent company. It's just business. But she knew with a sinking certainty that it was a lie. It was more than just business. And she was standing on the edge of a truth she wasn't sure she was prepared to hear. That night, the other shoe dropped. She was walking home from her studio, her mind still reeling from the encounter with Ji-hoon's father. Two men stepped out of an alley, blocking her path. They weren't like the creepy follower from before. They were professionals. Their eyes were cold and empty. "Miss Han," one of them said, his voice flat, "you should be more careful about the company you keep. Some worlds are not meant to overlap. It would be a shame if something were to happen to those pretty artistic hands of yours." He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The threat was crystal clear. They melted back into the shadows, leaving her frozen on the pavement, her portfolio clutched to her chest, her blood roaring in her ears. This wasn't a warning from a random thug. This was a message, and it had been sent by Chairman Kwan. She ran the rest of the way to Ji-hoon's penthouse. He had given her a key, a gesture of trust that now felt like a cruel joke. She let herself in, her hands shaking, and found him in his study, staring out at the city lights. "They threatened me," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "Two men. They said something would happen to my hands. It was your father, wasn't it?" Ji-hoon turned, and the look on his face was terrifying. The calm was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous fury. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands gently framing her face, his eyes scanning her for any injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a strained whisper. "No, but I'm scared, Ji-hoon. What is going on? What is the Golden Phoenix? You have to tell me the truth. All of it." He closed his eyes for a moment, a look of profound weariness settling over him. This was it, the moment he had been dreading, the moment the fairy tale would end. He led her to the sofa and sat beside her, taking her hands in his. His were cold as ice. "The Golden Phoenix Syndicate is my family's legacy," he began, his voice low and even, as if he were reciting a history lesson. "On the surface, we are a chaebol. We deal in shipping, construction, technology. We are legitimate. We are respected." He paused, and she could feel the weight of the words he was about to say. "But beneath that," he continued, his eyes boring into hers, "is the real source of our power. We control the unions. We run illegal lending operations. We smuggle goods. We eliminate competition. We are not just businessmen, Eugene. We are gangsters. And he took a deep, shuddering breath, am the head of the family. I am not a prince. I am a kingpin." The confession hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Every strange detail clicked into place. The instant security, the way people feared him, his father's chilling words, the threats. It wasn't a business. It was a criminal empire, and the man she loved was its king. The art supplies, the studio, the gallery owner. It was all paid for with money steeped in violence and intimidation. The safety he had provided her was a product of the very danger he cultivated. She pulled her hands from his as if she'd been burned. A wave of nausea rolled over her. "The blood money," she whispered, the words from her future goodbye already forming in her heart. "Eugene," he pleaded, his voice cracking for the first time. "It was a life I was born into, a duty I never asked for. None of it ever mattered. Until you." "Don't," she said, scrambling to her feet, backing away from him. "Don't you dare try to make this romantic. What you are, it's wrong. Everything you've given me, it's all tainted." And that's when she found herself by the penthouse door, the rain starting to fall, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She saw the agony on his face, an agony that matched her own. But it didn't matter. Love couldn't build a bridge across a chasm this wide, this deep, this dark. "I can't," she whispered, the tears finally coming. "You built a cage of gold and called it a palace, but the bars are still bars, Ji-hoon, and the blood that paid for it is still red." She left. She walked out of the palace and back into her own world, leaving the king alone on his throne of lies and shadows. The separation was a physical pain, a constant, dull ache in her chest. Her life, which had been filled with color and light since meeting him, reverted to shades of gray. The misery of their separation was a silent, shared torment. For Eugene, safety felt like a punishment. She moved in with Sohee for a week, too terrified to stay in her own apartment. She quit her job at the cafe, unable to face the place where she had first met him. She abandoned the art studio he had arranged for her, the smell of turpentine and oil paint now reminding her of his deception. A dead-end job stocking shelves at a dead-end job stocking shelves at a 24-hour supermarket, the anonymity of the night shift a welcome shield. The work was mind-numbing, her colleagues transient, and the pay was barely enough to live on. But it was honest. The money she earned was hers, clean and untainted. Her mother, who she called out of a desperate need for connection, was predictably unsympathetic. "I told you, Eugene, men like that, they are trouble. They use girls like you and then throw them away. You should find a nice, stable boy with a government job." Her mother's words, meant to be practical, felt like stones thrown at her already bruised heart. So he was her only solace. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She just sat with Eugene in the cramped apartment, sharing cheap takeout and watching old movies, letting her friend cry without asking why. "I miss him," Eugene confessed one night, the words tasting like poison and honey. "Isn't that terrible? I know what he is. I know what he does. But I still miss him." "It's not terrible," so he said, squeezing her hand. "It's human. You fell in love with the man, not his job title." But were they separate? Could you carve out the good in a person and discard the bad? Eugene didn't think so. The darkness was part of him. It was the source of his power, his confidence, the very things that had drawn her to him. She tried to paint, but her canvases were filled with dark, stormy cityscapes, skylines of glittering, empty towers. Her art was grieving, and she didn't know how to stop it. For Ji-hoon, the silence in his penthouse was a living entity. It mocked him from the empty chair across the dining table, from the cold side of his king-sized bed. Yoo-jin had been a vibrant splash of color in his monochromatic life, and without her, the world was leached of all meaning. Finalized the hostile takeover of the shipping company with brutal efficiency, crushing the opposition without a hint of mercy. He expanded their lending operations, his methods becoming more aggressive. He was everything his father wanted him to be, a perfect, unfeeling monster. But it was all a facade. At night, he would stand in his study, the room where he'd confessed everything to her, and stare at a small, simple sketch. It was one of hers. He had bought it from the gallery owner he'd introduced her to. It was a drawing of an old woman selling flowers on a street corner, her face a roadmap of hardship and resilience. It was the only thing he had left of her. He saw his world through her eyes now, and it was unbearably ugly. The deference of his men looked like fear. The luxury that surrounded him felt cheap and hollow. The power he wielded felt like a disease. She had called his life a cage, and now he could feel the bars pressing in on him. Min-jun watched the transformation with growing alarm. He saw the emptiness in his boss's eyes, the way he moved through life like a ghost. "Sir," Min-jun said one evening, finding Ji-hoon in his office long after everyone else had gone home, "this is not sustainable. You are destroying yourself." "I am doing my duty," Ji-hoon replied, his voice flat. "No," Min-jun countered, his loyalty giving him the courage to speak plainly. "You are performing an autopsy on your own soul, all for a legacy you never wanted." The turning point came during a meeting with a rival faction, a dispute over territory. His father advocated for a swift, violent resolution. An example needed to be made. It was the old way, the way of blood and fear. And for the first time in his life, Ji-hoon felt a powerful revulsion. He looked at the faces around the table, hard, violent men who dealt in pain, and he saw the men who had threatened Yoo-jin. He imagined her pretty, artistic hands being broken, and something inside him snapped. He stood up, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "No." His father stared at him, bewildered. "What did you say?" "I said no," Ji-hoon repeated, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that came not from his title, but from a deep, unshakable conviction. "There will be no more bloodshed. There will be no more examples. This ends." Now. He was choosing her. He was choosing the man she thought he could be. That night, he began his grand, impossible gesture. He started a war, not with his rivals, but with his own organization. It was a quiet, strategic coup. He met with Min-jun, outlining a plan that was both brilliant and incredibly dangerous. "We are going legitimate," Ji-hoon declared. "Completely. We cut off the loan sharking. We end the smuggling. We use our existing infrastructure, the shipping, the construction, and we make it clean. Every last one." "Sir, your father will kill you," Min-jun said, his face pale. "The captains, they will not accept this. This is all they know." "Then they will learn a new way, or they will be removed," Ji-hoon said, his eyes burning with a zeal Min-jun had never seen. "We will sever ties with anyone who resists. We will sell off the toxic assets. We will build something new from the ashes of the old." The confrontation with his father was brutal. Chairman Kwan saw his son's plan not as redemption, but as the ultimate betrayal. "You would throw away everything our family has built for generations? For a girl?" he roared, his face purple with rage. "I am throwing away the poison," Ji-hoon countered, his voice steady, "so that something clean can grow. I am doing it for me." It took months of threats, backroom deals, and betrayals. He lost allies, he made powerful enemies. He systematically dismantled the empire his father had built, piece by bloody piece. He used his immense fortune to buy out the illegal elements, paying a king's ransom to cleanse his kingdom. He was a king abdicating his throne, not for another ruler, but to tear the castle down and plant a garden in its place. He lost half his fortune and all of his father's respect. But with every illicit business he closed, with every tie he severed to the underworld, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He was becoming a man that Han Yu-jin could love. He was becoming a man he could live with. 6 months after she had walked out of his life, the Golden Phoenix Syndicate was no more. In its place stood Phoenix Industries, a smaller, leaner, and completely legitimate corporation. He was finally free. And now, he had to see if she was. Yu-jin had finally found a fragile peace. She had her own small apartment again, paid for with her own money. She had entered a few of her paintings into a local art fair, a small community event held in a public park. To her astonishment, she had sold 2 of them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a validation that her dreams, however small, were still hers. She was standing by her small booth, watching families wander by when she saw him. He wasn't in a tailored suit or a luxury car. He was on foot, wearing simple jeans and a gray sweater. He looked thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but the heavy, dangerous aura that had always clung to him was gone. The king had shed his crown, and in his place stood just a man who looked lost and hopeful and terrified all at once. Her heart stopped. Then it started again, a frantic, painful thrumming against her ribs. He walked toward her slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He stopped a few feet away from her booth, his hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't look at her paintings. He only looked at her. "Yu-jin," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Ji-hoon," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see the art," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "I heard a very talented artist was showing her work today." She didn't know what to say. The months of anger and heartbreak warred with the tidal wave of love that was rising in her chest. "The Golden Phoenix Syndicate is gone," he said, getting straight to the point. His directness was still there, but now it felt vulnerable, not commanding. "I dismantled it, sold off the dirty parts, shut down the operations. It's a legitimate company now, smaller, poorer, but it's clean." She stared at him, speechless. Dismantled it? An entire criminal empire? It was an impossible, unthinkable act. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "You were right," he said, his gaze unwavering. "It was a cage. I was living in a cage and didn't even know it until you showed me the sky." "I didn't do it so you would take me back, Yu-jin. I did it because you showed me a better way to live. I did it for me." He took a hesitant step closer. "But I hope," he added, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, "that the man I am now is a man you could choose, a man whose hands you could hold without feeling the stain of what they've done." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring his face. He hadn't made a grand, empty promise. He had made a change, a real, tangible, world-altering change. He hadn't just offered to change for her. He had rebuilt his entire world because of her. She closed the distance between them, her hand rising to touch the scar above his eye. He flinched almost imperceptibly, as if unused to a gentle touch. "Is it really gone?" she whispered. "All of it," he confirmed. "My father has disowned me. Many of my old associates would see me dead, but I have never felt more free." She looked from his face to her paintings, the vibrant, hopeful canvases she had created out of her own grief. She had survived. He had redeemed himself. Their separate journeys through the darkness had, impossibly, led them back to the same place. She didn't need to say anything else. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. It was not a fairy tale kiss. It was desperate and messy, tasting of salt and sorrow and a fierce, unyielding hope. It was the kiss of two survivors who had found their way back to each other. It was the reunion kiss that marked the end of their painful separation and the true beginning of their future. He held her tightly, as if he were drowning and she were his only air, his hands tangling in her hair. It was a promise, a prayer, an absolution. 1 year later, the light in the studio was perfect. Yujin added a final dab of white to the canvas, capturing the glint of sunlight on water. Her studio was large and airy, with a view of the Han River. She had earned it. After the art fair, her career had taken off. A critic had discovered her. Her story, though not the whole story, had captured the public's imagination, and she was now one of Seoul's most promising young artists. The door opened and Ji-hoon walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from a small, independent cafe down the street. He no longer had chauffeurs or assistants trailing him. He ran a philanthropic foundation, using what was left of his legitimate fortune to fund arts programs and community outreach. His work was quiet, meaningful, and entirely his own. He handed her a cup, his fingers brushing against hers. The simple touch still sent a jolt of electricity through her. He looked at the painting on her easel. It was a landscape of the park where they had reunited. It was bright, full of life and color. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice filled with a quiet contentment she now knew so well. "It's honest," she replied, echoing the words she had said to him in the museum what felt like a lifetime ago. "It's not trying to be perfect. It's just showing the light after the storm." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood there together, looking at the painting. Their past was a part of them, a collection of scars, both visible and invisible. But it no longer defined them. They were not a kingpin and his captive, but a man and a woman who had fought their way out of the darkness, choosing love, choosing redemption, choosing to build a new, clean world together, one brushstroke, one good deed at a time. This was their beautiful, messy, perfect reality, and it was more wonderful than any fairy tale. This story teaches us that true love doesn't just accept a person for who they are, but inspires them to become the best version of themselves. It's a powerful reminder that no one is beyond redemption and that real change, while incredibly difficult, is possible when motivated by a love that is pure and uncompromising. It shows that true strength isn't about power or wealth, but about the courage to dismantle a life that is wrong, no matter the cost, to build a new one that is right. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story of love, danger, and redemption moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic tales, and sharing it with someone who loves a story about second chances. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of Ji-hoon's grand gesture? Was dismantling his entire criminal empire a realistic act of love, or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, for our next story, who would you like to see find their own path? Should we follow? A. Min Jun, the loyal second in command, as he navigates the new legitimate world and perhaps meets a woman who challenges his lifetime of discipline? Or B. So-hee, the supportive best friend, who accidentally gets entangled with a disgraced rival of Ji-hoon's, forcing her to choose between safety and a dangerous attraction? Vote in the comments for A or B, and we'll see you in the next story.